Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Using the Principles of Universal Design in Faith Formation. My name is Rachel Chung, Disabilities Coordinator with the Archdiocese of Washington Department of Special Needs Ministries. This webinar is part 3 of a series of webinars to support clergy, directors of religious education, catechists, volunteers, and family members as we navigate a new school year with distance learning, virtual formats, and other challenges. Later in the webinar, we will welcome Kaitley Javier, Coordinator for Adult Faith Formation and Hispanic Catechesis with the Archdiocese of Washington Office for Catechesis. We are so grateful for our partnership with the Office for Catechesis in presenting this webinar series. Please note, our webinar today will be recorded and available in the Archdiocese of Washington website in the coming days. We will allow time for questions and comments. Please note the question box by the side of your screen. We are looking forward to hearing from you on ideas, thoughts, and additional resources you may want to share. So let us begin our time together today in prayer. The prayer we are using is from that All May Worship Guide, which was developed by the American Association of Persons with Disabilities Interfaith Advocacy Coalition. All of our participants are muted today, but we do ask for you to respond in your homes or offices, wherever you are today, as we pray together the Interfaith Litany for Wholeness. Let us pray for all God's people, for people who are blind and cannot see, and for those who can see but are blind to people around them.
God, in your mercy, help us touch each other.
For people who move slowly because of accident, illness, or disability, and for those who move too fast to be aware of the world in which they live.
God, in your mercy, help us work together.
For people who are deaf and cannot hear, and for those who can hear but who ignore the cries of others.
God, in your mercy, help us respond to each other.
For people who learn slowly, for people who learn in different ways, and for people who learn quickly and easily but often choose ignorance.
God, in your mercy, help us grow in your wisdom.
For people who have chronic illnesses for which there is no known cure or relief, and for people who live in unholy fear of developing a chronic illness.
God, in your mercy, help us and heal us.
For families, friends, and caregivers who serve people with disabilities, and for those who feel awkward in their presence.
God, in your mercy, help us see each other with your eyes.
For people who think they are worthless and beyond your love, and for people who think they don't need your love.
God, in your mercy, help us accept your love.
For people who feel isolated by their disabilities, and for people who contribute to that sense of isolation.
God, in your mercy, change our lives.
For all the people in your creation, that we may learn to respect each other and learn how to live together in your peace.
God, in your mercy, bind us together. Amen.
Amen. So thank you everyone again for joining us today. So in this webinar today, we will define what universal design is for the classroom and whatever setting we may find ourselves in. We will also describe the different ways children and adults learn, because we do indeed all learn in different ways. We will share some tips for success in a classroom setting, both in person and virtual. And yes, of course, we will discuss challenges for universal design, especially in our virtual formats. And we will conclude today's webinar highlighting a few upcoming events. So we thought today we would kind of engage with everyone and see and do a quick poll. So we'll go ahead and launch this poll. So you should be seeing coming up, we'll ask everyone to go ahead and select one of the following. So in your role, and you could have many roles as DRE, catechist, volunteer, parent, what is one challenge that you encounter in reaching all types of learners? So go ahead, everyone. I'd like you to go ahead and participate in the poll here. Okay, great. All right, we got everyone. I'll still need some folks to vote if you'd like to participate. So again, what is the challenge that you encounter in your various roles? Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll and share the results. So let's see. Wow, that's very interesting. So we're all split on 20%. Here's some of the choices, and there might be other ones that you might have. The materials that are used are difficult to adapt. That's looks like 20%. Classroom management, also 20%. Teaching skills for a specific need. We all feel that challenge at times. And adapting to virtual formats, as we know, is a challenge right now. And of course, the level of parent involvement. So, wow, it looks like we really have all different kinds of challenges that we're facing. So thank you, everyone, for participating in our poll. Let's see if we can, hold on, Caitlin, I think let's see here. So we're going to get back to our screen here. I think. All right, there we go. Sorry, everyone. Sometimes it's challenging to manage our webinars as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my good friend here, Caitlin, who again is with the Office for Catechesis here with the Archdiocese of Washington. So welcome again, Caitlin.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining this incredibly important conversation. I see from the attendee list, many of us are catechists, many of us are catechetical leaders. And so I give you all a special welcome for joining us. And we wanted to start off this webinar, this discussion, by looking at the idea of universal design. And I want to put the vision of universal design within the context of our mission as catechists. So we are all here because we all share the unique mission of transmitting the faith to our children and our young people and our adults. We're all here to form children, young people, and adults in the faith. And our new directory for catechesis launched this summer has this beautiful quote about our catechetical mission, where it says, "It is therefore reasonable to offer pathways of catechesis that vary based on the participants' different needs, ages, and stages of life." So as catechists called to form children, young people, and adults in the faith, we are also called to adapt our catechetical methodologies to best fit the needs of the person that we have in front of us, to best fit the needs of that person that we are called to form. And that, in its essence, is the vision of universal design for learning. It is understanding that we need to approach the method of catechesis, we need to approach our teaching endeavor with a spirit of adaptation, with a spirit of adapting to the needs of the young person, of the child, of the adult that we have in front. And so it defines as this: universal design is an approach to curriculum design that can help teachers customize curriculum to serve all learners, regardless of ability, disability, age, gender, or cultural and linguistic background. So exactly what our directory was saying, right? It's this vision that we must adapt our approaches. We must customize the design of our curriculum, the design of our methods and of our activities, of everything that we are going to do in our catechesis to best serve the needs, the realities, the language, the abilities of the person that we are trying to form. Next slide. And so with that in mind, right, looking at universal design as this ability, as this vision that we need to adapt to the reality of our person in front of us, of our children, of our young people, and of our adults, regardless of the realities that they are in, but rather taking those realities as the foundation with which we adapt and customize, there are a couple of elements that we need to employ. First and foremost, we need to employ multiple means of representation, meaning in implementing a universal design for catechetical formation, we need to provide different methods for transmitting the faith. We need to use different ways, different and creative methods with which we are going to teach what it means, what the Eucharist means, to teach what confirmation is, to teach what baptism is, all in a different and creative method that best serves the needs, the learning needs of the person in front of us. We also need to employ multiple means of action and expression. That doesn't necessarily just speak to the action and expression of teaching, but also the action and expression with which our children, our young people, and our adults are going to show us what they have learned. We need to provide them, our children, our young people, our adults, those that we are catechizing, we need to provide them opportunities with which they can show us what they've learned in a way that is more comfortable to them, in a way that takes into account their skills, their abilities, that allows them to really show us back that they understand what confirmation is, that they understand who is in the Eucharist, that they understand what happens at baptism in different and creative ways, depending on their own learning needs and abilities. With all of this, we need to have multiple means of engagement. And with that, we need to tap in to the interests of those that we're trying to catechize, particularly with our children with disabilities, with special needs. We need to tap into what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are their interests, what are ways that we can really tap in to their interests, to their desires, so that we can really get them engaged, really get them intrigued in what we are trying to transmit. And we need to use different and creative methodologies, always changing, always adapting, so that our children, our young people, and our adults can stay excited, can stay interested, can stay wanting to learn more about the content of the faith that we are trying to transmit to them. And so with that, next slide, we want to look at what are the different ways in which our people learn, right? We all, as Rachel was saying, we all have different methods of learning that we feel most comfortable with. And so we need to look at this beautiful graphic as just a guideline for us to say, okay, when we see the child in front of us, what is the method that they most prefer when it comes to their learning? What do they feel most comfortable with in terms of their learning? How do they best learn? We'll see that some of our students are mathematicians, right? They're more logically inclined. Some of our students are more musically inclined. They learn the meaning of the Eucharist by listening to a song about the Eucharist, by singing along to that song. We'll see that some of our students are more interpersonal. They learn best by having dialogue with other students, by really engaging in a group project, in a group discussion. And so we need to look at these different intelligences as kind of a map which we then analyze and identify what are the strengths of the students that we have in front of us, so that in identifying their strengths and identifying the ways in which they learn, we can then adapt our teaching to best serve those learning needs and those learning realities. And so with that, I love this next graphic. If we can flip the slide, it says we're all different, we're all smart in different ways, right? And so if we can, as catechists, look at our students and say, okay, who is the artist in the group? Who is the mathematician? Who's the writer? Who's the one that loves to read? Who's the scientist? Who's the one that loves to explore nature? If we can identify those strengths are highlighting the learning methods that those children prefer. And so in being able to identify those learning methods, we can then adapt our teaching by providing our students with activities and presentations that are engaging to them. For example, if we can see that we have an artist, a visual artist in our classroom, we can maybe create an activity on the Eucharist where they have to artistically describe what does the Eucharist mean to them, right? Who is in the Eucharist, and allow them to do an art project around that. That's a way for them to stay engaged. It's also an incredibly creative way for them to show us what they are learning in a maybe non-traditional classroom essay way. Though the essay may work with the writer. For example, if we have a student that is a writer, then we can say, give them a writing prompt to say, describe in your own words, what is the sacrament of confirmation? If we have somebody who loves nature, who's more of a scientist, who loves to explore, can we take a field trip outside and talk about creation and speak about the beauty of creation by looking at creation, by actually exploring nature? So as you can see, in identifying the different learning methods, we can then adapt our teaching methods to best serve and to best integrate those learning methods into our catechetical mission. Next slide. So beyond identifying what our children have in terms of their strengths and their weaknesses, beyond identifying their learning needs and preferences, there are a number of best practices that we could also use in setting up and implementing a classroom through the vision of universal design. One of those best practices is to provide a routine for our class. In other words, provide a lesson plan, create a lesson plan, have a guidepost for which you want to see what exactly you want to cover in that class from the beginning to the end. And on the right, we have a beautiful image of what that lesson plan can look like in terms of the different elements that you want to include in the routine of that class. We also want to set a realistic agenda for our class. We want to make sure that in that lesson plan, we say how much time each of these activities that we are incorporating is going to take. And we need to make our agenda realistic. I advise and I want to really emphasize, please no jam packing. Please do not try to cram every single piece of information into that lesson, into that class, especially in this time of pandemic where we have less time with our students. We need to be extra mindful and extra careful with the way in which we use our time, trying in our classes to not jam pack everything in, but rather focus on the most fundamental and most essential truths and teachings of our faith, so that our children and our young people are able to absorb those fundamental truths without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling like they just can't wrap their head around everything that you are trying to offer them. We also need to share our agenda with our students and our young people. Our students are more likely to pay close attention to us, are more likely to remain engaged if they know exactly what you would like their attention for and for how long you would like their attention. And so if we can share with them an agenda, maybe in an image like what we have on the right, to say, this is exactly what our day is going to look like. And as you go through each activity of the day, to have the students move from one activity to the next so that they can visualize what exactly is happening at each moment throughout the session. We also need to manage our environment. What does that mean? We need to create a space that is conducive to learning. We need to provide our students with a space in which they feel comfortable and open and able to open themselves to the teachings that we are trying to portray. If we are doing online faith formation, managing the environment also means empowering our parents to create an environment in which our children can learn. It means having that conversation with their parents to say, can you create a space at home where the child can retreat to for faith formation, where the child can go and learn in a space that is clean, in a space that is quiet, in a space that doesn't have many distractions. And especially as we speak later on in the presentation about particular learning needs, this idea of managing the environment is ever more important with our children that have particular sensitivities to light, sensitivities to sound, sensitivity to just the amount of people in a room. How are we creating an environment where there are not obstacles for faith formation, but it's rather an open space and opportunity for the child to grow in the faith in a way that is comfortable for them? Beyond the environment, we also need to work and really think critically about the language that we are using in our catechetical efforts. And we need to simplify our language as much as possible. And for this, I like to look at Jesus as the example. How can we tell stories and parables to really portray the truths of our faith in a way that is simple, in a way that is relatable for our students, for those that we are catechizing? This is where, as a catechist, we need to be very creative in terms of bringing the beautiful theology that we have as Catholics into words, into images, into metaphors that our children can understand in a more simplified way, that our children can really relate to it and really get what we're trying to relay to them in terms of our faith. We also need to set a calm and positive tone. And this is across the board, regardless of who is in front of us, regardless of who we're catechizing. Our students will feed off of our energy. If we come into our classroom, whether virtual or in person, and we are stressed and we are running around, and it's clear that we have a very overwhelming attitude, a very overwhelming energy, our child will naturally feel overwhelmed before you even start teaching. Before we even begin the lesson, the child will already feel the anxiety that is radiating out of us. And so how can we come in with a positive, with a peaceful tone, so that we can show them from our entire essence that this is an opportunity for us to encounter the Lord. This is an opportunity for us to encounter the Spirit of God in a peaceful, in a joyful manner. And that ties so perfectly into what I like to think of as living out the joy of the gospel, right? A very practical note for each of us is that we need to live out loud. We need to live joyfully. Beyond the catechetical materials, beyond the many teachings that we will try to relate to our students, the most effective gospel, the most effective message, the most effective transmission of the faith is going to come to our students from our witness. It's going to come from the way that we live out the gospel in the way that we relate to our children. And that is going to be key, and it's going to be seen in our joy, in our empathy, in our love as we treat our students throughout the session. We also need to be generous with praise. And that just relates so beautifully with the joy in terms of affirming our students, especially when we see them putting in so much effort, especially when we see them trying and trying again. Even if they're not getting it right, the fact that they are showing effort, the fact that they are trying, to be able to affirm them and say, you can do this, you got this. It's hard, but look at how much work you're putting in. That's awesome. Those words of affirmation, those words of encouragement are just fuel for our students to be able to continue to give, to be able to continue to learn, to be able to continue to want to grow in their faith in our classrooms. We also need to listen to our students. And again, all that we're saying applies to students of all learning needs, of all backgrounds, of all realities. We need to really listen to the wisdom of our students. We need to pause and understand that as catechists, yes, we have an incredible message to share, but the Lord also has placed an incredible message in the hearts of our young people in front of us that also needs to be shared with us. And so how can we create an environment in our classrooms where it's not just me as a catechist imparting wisdom, but rather we are growing together because the Holy Spirit is at work and speaking in and through our children as well. And so to take the opportunity to really listen to their words, really listen to what they have to say. We also need to provide reassurance, and this really ties with praise. We need to be able to provide that encouragement to empower our students to say, you got this, you can do this, you can make it through. And always, we need to ensure that every child knows that they are beloved by God. If there was this famous preacher that says, if you hear nothing else, we need to hear that. As catechists, if they get nothing else, message 1, 2, and 3 needs to be, you are a beloved child of God. You were created by God and you are loved by God. That needs to be the overwhelming message for our students at all times. And we need to think about different and creative ways to reaffirm that message in every lesson. And with all of that, I love this image that Rachel shared with me. It says Labels could not describe the sweetness of his soul. The sweetness of his soul had captured our hearts so completely. And so to remember that as catechists, we are imparting the beauty of the faith, but we are also being catechized by the children in front of us. We are also receiving the sweetness and the love of God from the child's joy, from the child's presence in our classroom. And so being able to have that opportunity to share in God's love together, affirming each other's gifts and talents. And with that, I want to just turn it over to Rachel, who's going to give us a little bit more of specific strategies when working with children with disabilities.
Thank you, Kately, so much for sharing those principles, because again, they definitely would help a child with different types of learning needs, but really they do help all of our children to learn about their faith. So what specific strategies can we use to support children living with disabilities in our classrooms? I think first of all is let us welcome our families as Jesus would. This image here, as you can see, is a boy behind what looks like kind of a blurry curtain. And this image is often used for an expression on how children living with autism see the world. They can see you, they can see other people, but they kind of have this veil in front of them and different challenges that they might have with actually interacting with the world. So when we come to greet our families, we can see that at times it can be very isolating, not just in our parish communities for different reasons, but also in school environments, in neighborhoods, and in our communities. So first, let us be that welcome as Jesus would. And we know Jesus in our scriptures picked up children and embraced them. So let us be that welcome for those families. And Kately actually mentioned this earlier, that some children we know are more sensitive to lights, sounds, and scents. Our Catholic faith is so beautiful in all its expressions that try to reach our senses, like incense used at Mass and candles and singing. But for some children and adults, they're very sensitive to those different types of stimulation to their senses. So many families might find, for example, the 7:30 Mass on Sunday, which tends to be quieter in some parishes, might be better for their child versus the midday morning Mass, where there's a choir and there's lots of action happening. So it's just one of those pieces that we need to be aware of. And especially when we do use in-person environments, trying to maybe turn off fans or lower lights, that can really help the child to calm and to learn better. And sometimes it's trial and error, which can be challenging, as we know. But let's tap into our families, whoever's bringing the child for faith formation, and get some tips from them. And again, it could be grandparents, parents, or other aunts or uncles. So let's tap into our families as well to see what strategies they might use at home. And also for our virtual formats, we know it can be very challenging for children, and especially children that are easily distracted. So let's envision a Zoom call. I'm sure many of us have been on there where there's multiple screens. So one suggestion, which perhaps the child will need assistance with, you can ask them to pin you as the teacher, so that that's the only video they see rather than everyone across the screen. So that could help. Using our safe environment protocols and in conversation with the family, it may help the child to actually turn off their camera so they're not distracted by the image of themselves. So again, let's just keep the conversations going, especially in those virtual environments where we know we all follow the safety protocols, but also looking at the individual child and what might work for him or her in those environments. We know again that some students might require actually more physical space to move around. And of course, within limits, we should allow children to maybe use fidgets or other types of small fidgets that can help them to calm. Many children with autism might find squeezing a rubber ball to help to keep them calm. Again, that's small and hopefully won't be distracting to the other students. And that's an opportunity as well, because we know how children can be. Well, why does he get to hold a ball and I don't? So that can kind of lead us into an opportunity to share with the family's permission about that child and their needs, because then that'll help the other children to grow. Oh, I see, this is something Johnny needs, so let's let him do that. So again, it's that opportunity to, with the family's permission, to kind of engage in that and to share that all children are welcome in our learning environments. And sometimes children do need frequent breaks, especially those children with autism and other sensory disabilities. So let's allow for that. Let's allow for those breaks. Now, for many of you here who have perhaps been to some other webinars that we have presented, we often talk about opening when we open our hearts to one child or a person with learning needs, we open our hearts to the entire family. So this image here is of a teenager in one of our parishes, and this teen lives with charge syndrome, which means she has many different needs, including she is deaf, she also has low vision, and she also has some intellectual disabilities. So the family presented her for First Communion at their local parish, and at that time they were denied, or meaning that the parish said, we cannot meet your child's needs in our classrooms. Unfortunately, that family walked away very hurt, and they actually did not come back to the church for many, many years. But slowly, step by step, the family started to return, and now this is when it takes our DREs, who are so key in our parishes. They are so key. One DRE knew their family situation. They weren't bringing her to church, their teen living with disabilities, but she knew the situation, and she reached out to that mom and said, let's walk together. Let's figure this out. I don't know all the answers, but let's help your daughter to receive her sacraments. And at this time, she was a teenager. So that DRE reached out to us for guidance and support. And the first time that we met her and her mother, so for many, many years, she's living in a Catholic family, right? And sometimes attending church, especially when she was young. And my colleague, Laureen, wanted to see how many signs she knew. And Laureen showed her the sign for Jesus, which is a very simple sign. And she looked kind of perplexed at that. And then Laureen pointed to a cross that was in the room, Jesus. And finally, she signed back Jesus. So for all those years, this teen never knew Jesus, really. So that one moment, I think, was very powerful for everyone there. And in fact, what we ended up deciding to do was to provide one-on-one catechesis in her home. Again, the mother was present, and that kind of came to an understanding as the community around her came up with a plan for her catechesis. And again, the DRE did not know all the answers, but she sought us out and for all the skills that was needed to help teach. And you can see here, she's actually receiving confirmation and her first Holy Eucharist here in her parish. And again, they decided as a community with the parish and the pastor to have a mass that was just for the family, because that was going to work best for her. So what a beautiful day. So she was fully initiated into the church. And of course, this brought the whole entire family back to the church. And in fact, again, our DRE advocated for sign language interpretation for one of the masses. And this led to other deaf Catholics coming to mass that lived in that area. So I can really thank this teenager for helping to bring others to the church in some small ways. Because for the deaf Catholic, they're certainly not going to come to Mass when they can't understand everything that's going on. So what a beautiful story about all of us being a community of faith and coming together and looking at the individual needs, which in this case would require one-on-one catechesis, but the success and the fruits. So it is a beautiful story that we can share about universal design and using our community of faith. So Caitlin and I thought now might be a good time to pause for any questions or comments, or certainly if you have a resource you would like to share with everyone, we would really appreciate that, and we'll be glad to share that out. So Caitlin, do you have any thoughts as well as people are typing into the question box?
I don't see any questions yet, but I smile every time I hear you tell that story, Rachel. It's just such a beautiful and just all-encompassing story. Just it's such a beautiful example of how we can all work together, and the humility of that DRE to say, I may not know all the answers. In this particular case, I may not have the perfect approach, if you will, or the skill set, quote unquote. But I have a desire to share Christ with you and your family. And so let's work together. Let me connect with the office. Let's try to figure this out. And I just want to just really highlight that for all of our catechists and our leaders listening. We don't necessarily need to have all of the answers. We are called to share the gospel to all God's people. We just need to have that willingness to say yes, that willingness to reach out. And to then connect, to say, if I don't have the answers, let's contact the Department for Special Needs, let's contact the Office for Catechesis, and let's think as a community, as a church, let's think, how can we accompany this child in need of the sacraments and in need of continued formation. So it's such an affirming story for me in general to reflect on that and the power of that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I think what we can do, again, please feel free to everyone to type in your questions, comments, challenges as well. And again, any resources you might have found, especially in this, which we know some parishes are deciding to be virtual only, some are waiting, and some are going ahead with some in-person parts. So any of your challenges, especially, we want to kind of especially look at some virtual formats as well. If some leaders here on the webinar have encountered any specific challenge with a virtual format. But let's continue on, but please, we want everyone to go ahead and continue with their questions and comments. So most often I would say, this is probably a lot of our DREs and volunteer catechists, and if there's any teachers here with us, classroom management is always a challenge, especially if you're working with children with a lot of different learning needs. It is challenging. So I would say that all of our behavior, whether we're have a learning need or not, is communication. So if we were here in person, I could easily tell by your body language if you were interested in this webinar or not interested in this webinar. So all the time we're communicating, and that's what we mean by behavior. We really do express a lot through those ways, and including especially children who might not be able to use words to communicate. We really have to be observant with that, because they are communicating, they're just doing it in different ways. So how can we set expectations for our classrooms? And again, these include our virtual formats as well. Children generally can meet the expectations if they know exactly what is expected. If we set out rules for the classroom, again, virtual or in person, generally most children can follow those rules. And just as we saw with the visual schedule earlier, that could be your classroom rules. Words and pictures is part of that universal design for the classroom expectations or rules. So all children can see, oh, when I sit quietly for this part, that's an expectation. But then later on in our classroom time, we'll be able to move around and be able to pick a book we want to read, for example. So now some of this is, again, that community of faith, right? Helping for our parents and any caregivers to make sure the children are well rested and fed will improve with that classroom management, that they feel that you are going to be a teacher that cares about them. They really understand that because of how you're communicating. And again, if we can, and we know some of the children in our class trying to turn down lights if we can, eliminating extra sounds. Ceiling fans are wonderful, but they are very distracting, especially for children with sensory needs, such as a child living with autism. So we can just turn those different things off, and it will really calm the setting down and help with that classroom management. Some children, especially those living with autism, might rock back and forth and hum. And again, we can allow for that within reason, because that will help calm the child. So that's a behavior that's communicating. They need to calm. And they're communicating with us in a way they know how to do it. So let me do it. So again, that takes some communication from the family as well to help us. And it can also be an opportunity to help engage the other children on how we learn differently. There's nothing with the parents' permission sharing about that. So some children might benefit from some one-on-one assistance in the classroom, and some parishes have engaged our teens as faith mentors across our archdiocese. So, and teens are ready to serve, when we can, and including in-person formats as well. And sometimes they're just waiting to be asked and provided that opportunity. So that's a good way to engage with a teen, that they can work one-on-one with the child and help them to bring them for breaks or other types of needs. And on the Archdiocese of Washington, Department of Special Needs Ministries tab, it's a long title, but under our webinars, if you scroll down, you'll see one on teen faith mentors. So I encourage you, if you're interested in thinking about that for your parish, to go ahead and watch that webinar or contact us here at the department. And of course, that as adults, we need to make sure that we are controlling the environment, not letting other children do that. As Caitlin mentioned, there's other children that like to be very interpersonal, but we are the ones who are in charge of the classroom. So I know many of us here, and perhaps some have participated in the University of Dayton Special Needs Certificate Program. Sorry, apologize. I have the link here, but if you did a search on University of Dayton Special Needs Catechist Training, that would certainly come up for their course schedule. So if anyone's interested, or they have a catechist that would like to expand their skills, University of Dayton has been really a pioneer, especially with helping children with learning needs in faith formation, and they continue to. So you can participate in those classes online. So I encourage all of us to take advantage of that. And I know some people here in our webinar have also completed that program. And they're also offering classes on adults with learning needs now as well. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin for our challenge of especially during this time.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so definitely in this time of pandemic, whether we like online formation or not, we've all kind of been pushed into the virtual world, the virtual realm in this time of pandemic. And so how do we think about universal design in a virtual classroom, in a virtual setting? And the reality is there are ways to still adapt to the needs of our students while doing online faith formation, but there are incredible challenges, especially this first challenge in thinking about overstimulation online, in thinking about using something like Zoom, for example, in which there are 20 plus cameras all at the same time, that overstimulation can be an incredible challenge, especially with our students that are more sensitive to that kind of stimulation. And so that challenge needs to be identified, and we need to think very, very creatively about, are there ways that we can minimize that challenge, whether in minimizing the amount of cameras that are on, or maybe going beyond the virtual, right? This time of pandemic definitely has pushed us into the virtual realm, but we need to think about ways to not solely depend on a virtual platform for our catechetical efforts, for our faith formation. And so we need to consider things that are hybrid. We need to consider, are there ways that we can maybe use our computers or our phones to see our students when we can't see them in person, while then providing other resources that families can do at home that go beyond the screen. And so this is the time to really connect with our families and to think creatively about, how can we not allow technology to be a challenge, but rather be one of the things that are incorporated in this greater vision of faith formation in this new reality. A place where we can find resources, and it was one of the poll questions for us today, lesson plans that we can maybe provide for our students. The National Catholic Partnership on Disabilities has an incredible tab, an incredible resource right now, in which it's under their catechesis. There's a tab called Adapted Faith Formation. And that particular webpage provides monthly lesson plans for catechetical formation that can be done in any format. If you look at the lesson plans, they provide activities for at-home conversations, for at-home activities, but also more structured lesson plans if a catechist wants to lead a session, for example. So that's an incredible resource to look at if we're looking for more adapted lesson plans that are more accessible to different learning and varied learning needs. Another point that we need to really, really think about when we think about not only virtual, but this reality that we are in general, is the calling, is the responsibility of parents as the primary catechist of their children. And so Rachel was mentioning this earlier. How are we connecting with families? How are we partnering with parents in this mission of faith formation of their children? We need to really empower parents to understand that we need to work on this together. We need to have a communal approach for faith formation where we all, like that beautiful story that we were listening to, where we all take part in our responsibilities, sharing our gifts so that we can support the needs of our students, regardless of what their learning needs may be. And so our parents are going to be able to tell us, for example, what is the best time of faith formation for their child. They'll be able to tell us if the child is acting in a particular way, what that means. They'll be able to tell us if a child has a particular sensitivity to something, if they can or cannot do something online. The parent is really the wealth of information in terms of the particular realities of their child, because they see these things manifested in their child on a daily basis. And so to be able to have that conversation as catechists and as leaders with parents to say, how can we think about this together? What are the needs of your child? How can we adapt our efforts to serve those specific needs? With that, we need to also consider, how can we support parents by providing them with resources where they can be the primary catechist? So for example, if we're empowering the parents to take the lead on forming their children, how are we as catechists and leaders sending them materials that they need to be able to lead those catechetical sessions at home? And in this, tactical resources are much better than sending them online resources. So being able to, for example, if we can print out the lesson plans from the NCPD website and mail them home and encourage the family to do those activities at home with the physical papers in hand, those are so much more accessible, especially for our children with special needs. And so how can we think creatively about providing those resources and then follow up, right? We should not say the parent is the primary catechist, here are the resources, go do it, have fun, but rather we are partnering with them. We are supporting them as parents in this mission of catechesis. And so how can we follow up with our parents to make sure that they're okay, to make sure that it's working, to make sure that they don't need any additional resource or additional formation, but then also support them by saying, can we meet? Can we as catechists also help form your child, be it in person or via FaceTime or whatever way works best, always, of course, following safe environment protocols. And so with that, this next slide is what I like to think about, just trusting the Holy Spirit. This is a year to think creatively. This is a time to really think outside of the box and to really brainstorm new and creative ideas that serve the very varied realities and needs of the children before us. And so how are we thinking creatively? Some ideas that came to mind for us, how do we do one-on-one lessons, for example? There will be students that need just more one-on-one faith formation, one-on-one mentorship. And so how can we as leaders, for example, identify catechists that can serve as one-on-one peer mentors or as one-on-one faith formation with particular students? Can we call upon catechists that maybe don't feel comfortable doing a large in-person class? Can those be the catechists that maybe do one-on-one with a specific family? Is that an opportunity to connect those two needs together so that they can do, whether it's a FaceTime lesson one-on-one or an at-home lesson, depending on the comfort level and the safety protocols of the family and the parish, to do those kinds of one-on-one lessons. Another creative idea is to do a hybrid model. So can we look at the virtual, the in-person, the at-home? Can we look at those three pieces together? Is there a way where we can create a plan that incorporates online faith formation, at-home faith formation activities, and in-person activities that best serve the needs of the child in a varied way? And this goes to what we were speaking about earlier. This is what we mean when we speak about using creative methodologies that engage different senses, that engage different approaches. And so can we do a hybrid model, for example, where the parent is leading an activity at home, and then that activity is followed up by a field trip at the parish, where the parent and the child goes to the sacristy with their catechist and learn about the different pieces of the church, the different vessels of the Mass in person at church. And then they do a follow-up conversation via FaceTime after the tour. So as you can see, those were three very different pieces, but all in a very hybrid, a very integrated approach to pass on, to transmit the faith. And so in essence, we need to adapt our programs, our efforts to fit the varied needs of our students. One size will not fit all, not for our children with special needs, but not with any of our children. The entire idea of universal design is that we are adapting our methods to fit the needs of the child before us. And so we really need to try and let go of our preconceived programs and structures and really think creatively and really invite the Holy Spirit to inspire new approaches, new methodologies, new methods, so that we can reach out and really form in a way that is best serving the needs of our child. And so those are just some of our brainstorming ideas, some of the things that we have seen worked, but we'd like to invite your ideas as well. If you would like to share in the question box or in the comment box, what is working for you, so that we can really do this as a network, as a community, all empowered and ready to serve with different ideas and different methods to best serve the needs of our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Rachel for some additional resources. I think you're muted.
Thank you again for that. And I also had a visitor, I think, as well. So let's go ahead and share some resources that I think some of us here might be familiar with this particular resource, but the US CCB guidelines for celebration of the sacraments. And again, we mentioned earlier NCPD, and at this time they are offering still free Spanish language copies of the guidelines for parishes, I believe up to 100 copies. So please make sure to visit the NCPD website for that information. And this really is a resource for our parishes in their faith formation programs. And again, it was updated most recently in 2017 to include communication devices and how they work with the sacraments, if people do not use words to communicate, and also about Holy Communion and those living with dementia. So if you haven't looked at this for some time, please go ahead and visit the USCCB website for PDF version. But again, you can also order some for your parish in Spanish. NCPD received a grant for that. So please go ahead and get those. They're free. And we were just talking about using varied methods. So again, if anyone here knows of children or teens with disabilities living in Spanish-speaking households, please contact Lilia Leon. We are forming some classes now using band as one method. This is a closed group. So that way we're ensuring these different safety protocols are being used. And here is an example of two brothers here, which Kately was talking about, where they watched a video on band on how to make palms for Palm Sunday. And then the mother worked with both of her children, with and without disabilities, to make this. This was, of course, during Holy Week. And then they returned on band to show all their pictures and of how they applied that lesson. So please reach out to Lilia and we will help connect you with that group. Again, for children living with disabilities and teens from Spanish-speaking households. And we are offering an information session for RCIA this Thursday at 7 p.m. For those adults looking to be fully received into the church that might have learning needs. So again, if you know any person or families interested, just email us at Special Needs Ministries at Special Needs Ministry at adw.org, and we will provide you the Zoom link to join that meeting this Thursday. And this time of year, we are so happy to again have our 11th annual White Mass that celebrates the gifts of people living with disabilities and persons who are deaf in our church, our universal call and baptism. So please, on our webinar today, we have the flyers both in English and Spanish, which provides the link to join virtually. And also at 1 p.m., we are going to have a Zoom gathering after our White Mass, since we cannot be in person this year. And we will show a recorded message from Archbishop Wilton Gregory, and he's responding to some questions from our communities. So please come join us at 1 p.m. for that recorded video and for fellowship and sharing after we watch that recorded message. All right, I think we may have some questions. Kaylee, we do have a few minutes left. So you and I will go to our question box. Thank you. We have a comment from one of our catechists here about using varied schedules. And again, also the suggestion about doing shorter lessons. That might be a way to kind of adapt when they do it in person. Here's another comment. Oh, wow. So this is a hard question from one of our catechists here. In some households, the adults disagree with how to teach a non-compliant child. How does the church provide support? Any resources? So I don't know, Kately, have you had any resources as well on when parents are not agreeing on, because they, again, we know they're the primary catechist.
So I'm not sure about any resources in terms of supporting the parents agree, but I think the biggest resource that we can provide is providing the parents a space to have that conversation. and to really discern together as parents what is the best approach for their child. And so maybe a conversation like that is within the context of spiritual direction with a priest to say, how can we best serve the needs of our child? Because that disagreement is not just going to apply to the teaching of their child, it's going to apply to the entire formation and raising of their child as a whole. So to have that conversation with father to moderate that, maybe in the terms of spiritual direction, in the terms of discerning together, I think that is a space that as a church we can provide for parents to be able to kind of disconnect for a moment and connect to the Spirit, to really listen to what God is asking of them and to consider together. I think an approach like that is going to minimize the tension that may arise, that may be stirring those disagreements, and really help both parents open up to say, okay, this is the reality and the needs of our child. What are we called to do? How can we best serve those needs and best raise our child in light of their reality? So that's what I would recommend truly as a starting point for them.
And may I also offer our Office for Youth Ministry. I know that throughout the year that they plan for different parenting supports with different leaders, both local and sometimes they're able to bring in national speakers. So definitely connect with our Archdiocese Office of Youth Ministry. Again, and that's how we can utilize all of our Archdiocese resources together to help our parents. That's an excellent question. Okay, this is kind of that one-on-one. Wouldn't one-on-one have to be more like 2-2? So we're talking about safety protocols. So I know for most of our special needs students that might need that, typically we do ask the parent to stay as well. And I'll give a good example about this hybrid model. I know one of our catechists wanted to do that tour of the church for one of her students preparing for First Communion. And the parent did stay with the child the entire time for the tour. So I know we're using one-on-one, but of course we have to make sure either it could be a 2-2, like 2 catechists, or again, we can engage the parent or grandparent and uncle as well.
Right.
What do you think with that? Yeah, we mentioned one-on-one, but that was a good point.
By one-on-one, we meant the catechist to the family. And so that approach in general is what we should think about, not only in terms of child protection, but in terms of what will best serve the needs of that child, to engage the family, to engage the parents particularly as a part of formation is key. And so what I mean one-on-one is that it's the catechist serving with the family. And if it's a tour, then it's the child will not be just with the catechist, because the parent will also be present, or the grandparent or the aunt, whoever is in charge of the faith formation of that child at home.
And we've also had to provide virtual one-on-one catechesis for our children and teens who are deaf. And at that time, again, we make sure the parent, again, is in the background as well, verifying they are there. Because of course, with American Sign Language, the camera must be on as well, of course. So thank you for allowing us to clarify when we meet one-on-one. Yes, thank you for that. Oh, and thank you for your suggestion here for spiritual direction, because I think that's a good point. Most often, if it's faith formation, the parents are having a challenge with, it certainly will be other areas of the family life. Okay, great. Well, let's see if we have any, and thank you for this. And actually, Caitlin, it's hard to believe, but we've actually ended our time here very well. And we want to honor everyone's time, especially if they are on their lunch hour. So thank you to everyone for coming. And I'd especially like to thank Caitlin and our Office for Catechesis for presenting this webinar series. And we will make sure that all of our webinars are on our special needs resource page. And if you have any challenges finding that, just give me an email and I'll help to guide you. And we also like to thank again all of our DREs, our catechists, our volunteers, and our families who truly bring us to our path to know Jesus better, our religious sisters and our clergy. So thank you to all of you for bringing us closer to Jesus. And we do so appreciate all of our families who are encountering many challenges during this time. So do not hesitate to reach out to us so we can walk together on this journey. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you again to Christina for interpreting our webinar today. So we will see you again for our next Lunch and Learn. And please, all are welcome to our annual White Mass this Sunday at 10 a.m. and well for our virtual gathering at 1. So thank you, everyone.
I'm so hungry I could die.